Two. All right, everybody. Well, welcome. This is the September webinar in our webinar series for the Instructional Design and Learning SIG of the Society of Technical Communication. I am Vicki Dill, and I host these crazy things. Our speaker today is Traci Nathans-Kelly. I'm going to introduce her in a second. We do run a webinar series. We have a webinar, an educational webinar once a month. And then we have our First Fridays webinars. They're on the first Friday of the month. Great time to network, to find out what's going on in the field. They're specifically sort of dreamed up for our students, but all the practitioners that come, we always have a good time too. So anyway, we've got a lot going on. Check our website. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Traci Nathans-Kelly. We thank Anita for introducing us to Dr. Kelly. She currently teaches at Cornell University's College of Engineering, as well as eCornell. That's with the small e and a great big C. And she's a member of the Engineering Communications program. She interacts daily to help engineers and technical professionals, that's like us, hone their workplace messaging, whether it be presentations on paper, meetings, teams, or through online channels. And Dr. Nathans-Kelly, she's worked with practicing professionals, technical experts, scientists, just a whole host of experts for over 25 years, which means she must have started when she was a baby, helping us all to strengthen our abilities and become impactful. And just before we started the recording, she was talking about her involvement in IEEE. Turns out she is an editor for their professional communications book series. She's also a speaker apparently at their ProCom, which is equivalent of the STC Summit. And you will get a link to the IEEE ProCom in the email that goes out typically after the the webinar, where you'll get a link to the recording, but also some of the backup materials. Anyway, I'm really excited to hear what she's going to talk to us about. So we're not all that fancy here, Traci. We're just going to let you take it away.
That sounds great. So I will apologize in advance. I give this talk a lot, and it usually takes me a full hour. I'm going to fire hose this. And then if anybody has questions or you want to continue some conversations, we could do that certainly, but I want to get the basics out there in front of everybody with some really kind of wonderful examples that we can chew on a little bit and really kind of work through them. I'm going to share my screen now. So I'm going to work us through some pieces here, and it may challenge things that you're used to seeing or doing, or the way that you train others, or ways that you create presentations for yourself even. But I'm a big believer in these changes, and they came from a place of pain. That's another story in and of itself. But my colleague, Christine Nicometo, and I really worked hard to figure out what would happen, what supports technical work the best when you're giving presentations. So we did write that book that you see there, Slide Rules. And then I added Christine's name here. She couldn't be here today, but feel free to email her or email me, and I can send you her contact information. If you want specific, tailored coaching of your own or additional information, I may not be able to, but because I have a full teaching schedule this term, but she's a consultant and she might be able to help you out. But I want us all to remember the before times, if we can, when PowerPoint was new and it was created. It was really interesting to read the history of this because it was created to be essentially electronic index cards. Okay, so it was meant to help you organize your talk without having to print out little index cards. It was not initially intended to be anything that we would project on the wall. Okay, so then of course they soon figured out, well, this has a little bit more use than what we thought, not just index card kind of thing. And so then we got our files, right, our typical templates that we see all the time now. If you look at this, it's an index card. Okay, so those early creators did not know about pedagogy. They did not know about instructional design. They didn't know about how the brain works and what it remembers. They thought, well, the index cards work for the speakers, and so we'll just use that. And they talk about this very clearly in their remembering of how the product was developed. So this is beautiful AI, even the shiniest, the newest, the most slick, elegant design patterns that are coming out all the time with these fresh templates are perpetuating all of the same bad things. Too much text, it's too small, it's not useful. All kinds of things are happening that are just old habits repeated. And that's for Prezi too, we'll come back to that. So typically what we see, if we follow the instructions to click here to add title and click here to add text, we end up with slides something like this. And so we get the title at the top, which is a fragmented thought, and we get a bunch of bullets. You can think of almost any presentation that you've ever seen, and it pretty much follows this. You're lucky if you found ones that don't. And this is the Comic Sans font aside, right? In this particular case. Other times people swing the other way and they go all visual. And so this was an example given to me by a grad student. So again, we still see the header at the top, click here to add title rather, but now we have a visual. But if you notice, even on your own screen, you'll have to magnify this beyond what I'm giving to you right now. If this was presented on the wall, it would be impossible, no matter how big the screen is. This font is too small. And so in those moments, the information collapses, right? It is not being communicated. Often our slide decks are given out as PDFs, or they're files that people can access later. And it's at that point that they can visually drill down into this and look at those little boxes. But if we notice up at the top of this blue circle, there's boxes on top of boxes. This is a PDF visual. It was flat to begin with. I can't get to it, okay, with the visual. So we have to be very careful about what it is that we're doing overall. Here's another one. This was from an undergrad. This was his before, right? People like to get fancy. And so this is an example of click here to add title. We do have a visual in the acreage. That's good. But then look at all that font, all of that writing down below. What happens in that moment when you give too much, and stop reading it right now. What happens in that moment is everybody stops listening to the speaker, because we only have so much bandwidth as humans. So we stop listening to the speaker and we try to read. And in this case, we try to unpack this ridiculous pie chart at the same time. And so we ignore the speaker. We try to unpack what's happening in front of us, because whether it's on your laptop or whether it's being projected onto the wall, human nature cannot ignore a big glowing thing. Okay, we can't. And so we have to control for that as speakers very, very carefully. This was given to me from a colleague of mine. He was mapping things. And he's like, look at this great slide I made. And I said, Carl, you're killing me, right? Because he wanted to put it up all at once so that people understood the breadth of this. What we ended up doing was something a little bit different with this, where he would show it all at once, but then he immediately took it away and said, now let's work through this. How do all of these things interact? And then that worked better. But his first impulse was just to put it up there and let it cook. This is a photograph that my husband took. He goes to a lot of events where he has to be the guy in the back of the room with a camera, a video camera. And this was of course, he snaps this photo and he sends it to me and he goes, here, you can use this in your talks. One of the things that breaks my heart the most when we're giving talks at a conference or anywhere else is this idea, again, look at the big glowing thing. Where's our speaker? Our speaker is clear over to the left. We can kind of see the sign on front of the podium. This is how dark this room actually was during the whole thing. So the speaker gets completely sidelined. in favor of the slides in moments like this. And that's the heartbreaking moment when we have devalued the speaker on top of the slides. So what I'm really trying to do when I'm talking about recrafting the way that slides are work is to break this paradigm that the slides are the thing. And I want to bring it back to more like this, where it's the speaker that's the thing that we want to pay attention to. So look how she's in the middle. She's not behind the podium. This is best of all possible worlds. If you have to be behind a podium, make sure the lights are signed on to you or, all focused on you. She has some way of doing interaction. And in this case, I would say, if we notice there's red, yellow, and green, which kind of leaves out anybody who's colorblind, but we want to take that into consideration too. But look at her. She has full command of this room. Everybody's in. That's what we want. And the slide behind her is just enhancing the moment. It is not taking it over. It's a backdrop. And that's really what I want to have happen to you. This is an engineering past student of mine. His name is Dave. This is a genuine moment. It looks like stock photography, right? Because he's happy and the slide is going and everybody's raising their hands. This was a genuine moment. And I'm snapping pictures because I was so happy for him that he found a way to get everybody all in. This is what we want, right? We want everybody to be able to face their audience, to authentically interact, to be that expert presence in the room. And to do that, I start with the low-hanging fruit, which is the slides. So the paradigm shift that we want to take is we want to quit the idea of the index card. We want to quit the idea that your slides are teleprompters. Your slides are not for you. Your slides are for your audience. Your slides are not to help you remember things necessarily, but they're to enhance what it is and how it is that the audience gets your information. A friend of mine, Ken, took this picture at a Bruce Springsteen concert. We want to flip the switch here. And so if you think about any time you go to a concert, in my household, we happen to go to a lot of Bruce Springsteen concerts because of my husband. And one thing that occurred to me, because this is how much of a nerd I am, is that Springsteen or anybody else, they never go out on stage and then put the lyrics on the big screen or on the Jumbotron behind them, and then turn around, not facing the audience, and then read those lyrics off or even sing them. That would be ridiculous, right? That would be a really bad move. Because we expect the person who's on the stage to know the words to his own song in this case. We expect the same from the people who are doing the presentations for us. If you are the star, if you are the speaker, you should know the words to your own songs. So we use the slides instead for our backdrop, for our Jumbotron, to enhance the thing it is that we're saying instead of replace it. So we have to take into account that slides often within our organizations do double and sometimes even triple duty. And the first one is support us during the live talk. That's obvious. But then the secondary one that a lot of people don't really think about is that they're housed, like this is being recorded. These are often housed, they're in the archive for lots of organizations. They are part of the documented workflow for contracts, for grants and so forth. Okay, so at least two things usually happen with any slide file. So let's keep that in mind, because what we want to change into doing is we're gonna push back against the template of the slide to begin with, and some of those more stale ideas about slide design, which will transform everything else. Okay, so the first one is we're going to deal with those headers and titles at the top. We're going to talk about how to deal with your visuals, and then the big piece is some archival note work. So, okay, the sentence headers. This is usually really hard for a lot of folks. This is from a friend of mine who was working at Lockheed Martin, and he was on the team redesigning those bins that are above our seats in airplanes, right? They're called stow bins. And he called me up and he's like, "Hey, Trace, I made a slide. Can you look at it?" Yeah, sure, of course. So he sends this thing in the email. I'm like, "What? Well, first of all, what is this font? What are you doing?" Right? Like, and he goes, "Well, I thought it looked technical." I'm like, "It looks ridiculous. But at the top, he just has that word stove in. Let's focus up there. Of course, his team knows they're working on stove in. But what this slide is about, even with all of its bullet points, is all of the considerations that have to be taken into account. These are not government, standards or anything. These are mostly materials and basic design ideas, okay, like decorative side uses for the blinds and so forth. So he just threw the word stove in at the top, like, yeah, we're talking about stove ins. Well, we already knew that. The idea for this header, look at mine for this page, the old ways don't work for anyone. We want to have one idea per slide, and we want a short, full sentence at the top, which serves kind of as an executive summary for whatever it is that's being spoken about. So we don't want to do this anymore, the single word kind of fragmented header. Instead, I love this one. It's an older example from a colleague of mine in Europe. Full sentence, make a claim. There is no doubt where my friend Joss stood on this issue. It's a bad idea, right? So we don't have to fuss with it. And what that does in a nanosecond, it allows your audience to understand immediately what your point is and then sit back and understand the details. So Joss, in this case, he had this, claim up at the top. It's a bad idea. And then he did and here's why. And we can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4 ideas. I had to use a PDF copy for proprietary reasons, but when he gave the talk, he brought in point number 1 and its little equation. And then he brought in point 2 down there in the red and its equation and so forth. So he brought them in one by one. And he worked people through the logic and the calculations to support why it was a very bad idea. So we're going to talk about sentence headers, no more than 2 lines, very distilled, full sentences, subject, verb, object. So instead of keywording like you would on your own index card, right, because you know your own talk, what we want to do is recast that for the audience. Instead of saying analysis, tell us that the analysis shows one key area. Because in the meantime, if you just say analysis, everybody else is going, oh my gosh, did they take my numbers? Are my numbers good? What's going on with that? I wonder how many pieces are we going to have to improve? Oh no, this means a lot more work, right? All of these questions start to come up. And then again, mental bandwidth goes somewhere else and they're not listening anymore. They're panicking, maybe just a little bit. Or if you only have one word at the top, they might be mentally already challenging what it is that you're going to say and they haven't even heard it yet. So having a full sentence at the top helps people just settle into the idea itself and go back to listening to you as you bring out all of the details. Here's a little bit different example. This is not just a one word, but it's still a fragment, right? Results. It's a comparison of estimation methods. My immediate question to this engineer was, is this good? Right? And certainly I knew in this particular case, his manager would not know if this was good or bad or something in between because he relies on, my colleague to translate that for him. And so I'm like, what's happening here? Don't just show me and say, here's a thing. Because headers or titles at the top like this basically say, here's a thing. And then you, as the audience, you have to look at this graphic and then decode it. Think about it. Is this good, bad? Does it affect my workflow? Does it impact my outcomes or my data analysis? And what is happening in that moment? You're not listening to the speaker again. Okay, so instead, do your audience a favor and just tell them what the point is. It validated cross-functionally. Done and done. We're good, people. Let's move on. That's all that needed to be said. Okay. Here's a nice example of a header, and I bring this one out because I want to emphasize that headers or titles don't always have to go at the top. So feel free to move the information around in a way that it enhances any visuals that you might have. This is a pretty classic example of an ANOVA output from my friend Larry. This is actually ocean spray. And so you can see they're talking about acres for their cranberries, and this is about hydration. And again, he knew so he was speaking in this case to people 2 layers up from him in the hierarchy. And he knew that they probably hadn't looked at a chart like this in some time. And what he was saying is, we're good. He could not finesse this output at the time, right? They just had to show the thing as it was, as ugly as it is. And I said, well, Larry, how are they going to know where to look that you're saying this is okay? And he goes, okay, I'll stick an arrow in there. But there's no mistaking what that arrow is pointing to. Look right here. Okay, so T3 shows more variability. Proof is sitting right here. Okay, now they know how to interpret it, and they can interpret it very, very quickly. Again, just another example about how you have maybe a big visual that is somewhat interesting, and you can have a very short sentence to kind of summarize your topic. It's a little bit more technical example. This is from an undergrad student of mine. He was on internship, and you can see great sentence header up there. I'm going to talk about the visuals here for just a second, but look at that wonderful header, right? Offsetting, this is great. And then he has some visual proof. What we ended up doing, because he has such high quality pictures, is that we went to 1 picture at a time. So he would talk about each of those 3 steps. And I just chose this one. And so now it has its own heading. And the picture sits behind it because, you know, engineers and technical people, they like to see this stuff. And so we just really blew that picture up, but we put the title or the header in a different place that wouldn't disrupt looking at the technology itself. So we're talking a little bit there about visuals and headings and full sentence headings, and let's think about just visuals for a minute. So a lot of people are moving towards templates like this that are kind of pre-cooked for us, and then we just add in some content. But if you look at this again, what's happening is that I bet most of you are trying to read this thing about the basketball and the sesame seed, and there's the sun and whatever, right? In these moments, everybody is trying to read instead of listen. And this is what we don't want to have happen. This is not a sentence header. It's just a cut and paste paragraph on top of a nice graphic. Keep the focus where it needs to be. Sometimes you don't need any words at all. Sometimes you just might need a sentence header. But this is too much. And a whole screen full of bullets like we showed before is too much. Even baby bullets like this one is too much. They're going to look at the cool picture, they're going to look at the title, and then they're going to look at the bullets in that order. So you have to hone the way that our eyes naturally track. And you have to really target the way that we take in information as humans. There's all of these really great brain studies now because they can see how our brains work, right? In the machines and which things they look at and eye tracking. All of these great studies are supporting the things that I'm asking you to think about doing. So instead of just having a fragment at the top, we want to convert that to a full sentence. We want to do something interesting with our graphic. But what are we going to do with all of these kind of bullet items? Even though there aren't bullets there, right? They're bullet items. We're going to do something else. We're going to, and this was a filler header that I put in there, but we're going to expand that graphic so that it's so big it almost becomes not useful, right? It's kind of just decoration, which is fine because the important thing is the idea. So for each of these 3 points over here that are be bulleted, instead of having one slide with a lot of fragmented ideas on it, we're going to maybe have 3 slides, each one focused with one idea. Having more slides does not take up any more time than having one slide that you have to slog through for 8 minutes, right? So think about it very clearly. You can move at a little bit quicker pace with each individual slide, but one idea per slide is really great. This was from an undergraduate outreach program. They were dealing with water pumps down here in these communities that are often dry, if you will. There's just no water. We can see why, right? Given where they're at in the geoscape down there. So they wanted to show the map of where these pumps would be placed, trying to get an idea to us about the landscape. So again, this time the header is off to the side, one full sentence, and a map that's really nice and big so we can see exactly what we're talking about. And they named the points of interest at this point for their starting point. And then they took us right to the one that they were going to talk to, which is adjacent to the Maverick section. So they layered in, right? They got us down to Texas and they got us to particular communities that were struggling with water. And then they brought us to that particular community where their water pump placement was focused. I love this example. This is a super example. It doesn't have one heading. It has 3 headings. But they're brought in and addressed one by one. It's a brilliant use of the entire concept being tailored for a specific moment. So this student was talking about the degradation of CDs and DVDs, right, as storage systems. And the polymers used in CDs and DVDs, right, they're like spaghetti. They're all tangled together, and this is just how they function. So they're like spaghetti. And then, so he talks about what is the process? Well, sometimes cleaning agents, right, can do some damage. And then eventually we have failure. I thought this was just so brilliant. It is one slide. It's easily changed into 3 slides if needed. It works well as one. It doesn't matter. The font was a little bit small. I probably would have liked it a little bit bigger down there at the bottom, but the progression of thought is brilliant. And by the way, when I asked him, where'd you get the stock photography of the spaghetti? He's like, no, that's like in my apartment. I put a piece of foam board behind my countertop there, and I just dumped the spaghetti on the countertop. I thought it was brilliant, right? So again, if you think about using these concepts in very specific ways to meet your very specific technical or design needs, you're going to come up with something that serves you very, very well. Sometimes you don't need a header at all, right? You have something so magnificent, like this microscopic picture, that you just want it to speak for itself. And then, you as the technical expert, you would be talking to it. And what is it about? And what do we see here? What techniques were used to produce this particular microscopic image, whatever the topic might be. You do not have to have a header on every single slide. Sometimes it's more effective to use none and you be authentic presence there. I'll come back to that in a bit. What do I do with a boring graph? I get asked this question all the time. And so let's say you have something like this. Oh, look, lovely sentence header up at the top. So this was some of my computer modeling students here at Cornell. They do medical modeling. And geez, right? We look at this, and even though I've been with this class for well over a decade, I just looked at this and I went, I don't know what I'm supposed to be seeing. Right? Mesh convergence shows pulsating flow. Like, where am I supposed to focus? How do I interpret this? If we were writing a journal article, we could have a caption underneath and we would know how to interpret this. But in the middle of a talk, we have the speaker. But you can do stuff to your visuals that will help you. So what they decided to do was they wanted to focus in on this section right here. Okay, and then they even added in that their third cycle, that's where they chose to focus for a further analysis. So that layered activity, we have a nice sentence header at the top. The graphic was still kind of a complexity that wasn't easily unpacked in those quick moving moments that are our presentation. So they took our eyes to the right place, and then they even annotated it a little bit. That helps for archiving too. Same thing here. We saw this before, where maybe instead of a header, we could use a supplement of a pie chart or some other kind of chart to help us make our point, right? This is a classic. This is a graph that was made by a student who was an internship at an automotive manufacturing plant. And here's a piece of data. It's incredibly complex. There's all kinds of things to unpack. And often we just see people throw something like this up on their slides, and then they'll point to it generally, and then they'll say, as you can see, we've got problems around minute 135. I'm like, as you can see, what? It's a mess, right? It's too hard, it's too complex, especially during a talk when we move very quickly through visual evidence. So if you play around with it, you can make it worse. This is the same data set. This is what 1 or 2 clicks will do, right, to your data set. I'm sure as all of us know, like, we're not doing this, it's bad. This is bad, 3D, bad. So what we want to do instead is we're back at the one we want to get rid of that default gray background, first of all, to provide some clarity. But then if we want to focus in again on a segment, show the whole thing maybe for context, but not for long. Take our eyes to a specific spot and then say, okay, now we're focused in. This is that same span. Let's look at this. Okay. So it's kind of a, you drill down 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layer, and you help just bring people's attention to where it needs to be. And that can happen within seconds. Context, draw it in closer, and now analyze. So for all of you who are nervous about getting rid of all of your bullets that are on the slide, one of the most important things for you, and this is extremely important for university work, for your students, for taking notes, it's important for design work, it's important inside of our institutions, our organizations, our NGOs, our government spaces, is to use the notes that are available in all software programs for presenting. And so we're back at this wonderful thing, right, that our expert was going to talk about. But if we don't use archival notes, or if we haven't turned on our text, our speech to text to capture it, this information is going to be lost. If this is all there is with the slide, unless you're there in the moment, the information will disappear. So we need to do something else. And so we're going to use that notes pane. So a lot of people have never used it before. Maybe all of you have, I'm not sure. But we want to at least put credit where credit is due, which is what you're seeing down here at the bottom. And anything else you would have normally put in bullet points all over your slide. So we're going to cut our bullets out as much as possible, put them down in the notes pane. That way you can either use them as speaker notes if you need them, but they also track and they follow with the slide file. So those talking points are now available for anybody who has missed the meeting, okay? Here's an example that we have here, right? Doing a study about food deserts. And so we have our nice sentence header at the top. But if the speaker would go on and talk about this for a good couple, 3 minutes, somebody wasn't at the meeting, but this is all the slide held, we need more. Well, this is what they had, right? So the talking points are kind of up more at the top where the paragraphs are, and then look at all the nice sourcing as well. So that notes pane can hold not only where you got images or references, but main talking points that normally people try to jam into all the bullets on the slide. I want to emphasize, when you put, sometimes you need bullets. Every now and again, I use them too. You need a list sometimes. That's fine, but it shouldn't be the default move no matter what the PowerPoint presentation said. Because what happens is if you just fill out a bunch of bulleted points on your slide, is that you feel beholden to read them word for word. You feel beholden to address them in that order. And when that happens, all of a sudden, you become very much less authentic. Interruptions aren't handled well, right? And people can tell that maybe, or assume that you're nervous, that you're a little bit unsure about what it is that you're saying, because you're relying on this big glowing script that's kind of behind you. People often turn around right? And read their slides. And putting your back to your audience is one of the worst things that you can do. And so I really do encourage you, use the sentence headers just to help keep your audience and yourself right on track with the topic, but then talk with your expert self in the room and leave all those bullets down in the notes pane. Then when people say, oh, I missed the meeting, can you just send me your slides? What you send them is a PDF. You don't send the PowerPoint files unless they need them to create their own talk for some reason, but then always send them first a PDF. And you want to format your PDF in the way that the slide is at the top. So if they need any graphs, right, that are up there, or visuals, but all of the talking points, all of the notes also show up. And some of you may already know this trick. So you save it as a PDF. That's your first step. Somewhere on your interface, and it changes, of course, with every update, there will be print what, and one of your drop-down choices will be notes pages. That's that second step you see down below. That's what we want to have happen. It looks different ways with different interfaces. So this was what I was using a while ago, a couple of years ago, where I would have to go to publish, and then it wanted to create handouts in Microsoft Word, which is fine. And then I just change them into PDFs because I was trying to lock them down a little bit. Those options are always there. So you just have to find them sometimes depending on what version of whatever the software is that you have. This is what mine looks like as of this morning, right? So I save as a PDF. Oh, actually, this one is from a little bit ago. It's an older PDF, but PDF, and then I have to go down to that PDF button and choose save as PDF, right? But I also have to choose, look in the middle here, slides with notes. So that indicator of notes will be there. And then you'll get that beautiful top with the slide, bottom with all your notes. Be careful if you're sending things to clients, make sure you edit out anything that they don't need to be having. Please know that if you are layering information across several, you have one slide and you're bringing things in one by one, right? You're layering or animating them in. When you do this, when you save as a PDF, sometimes you can end up with a little bit of a mess like this. So just turn it into 2 slides, right? So we can see that back one, and then we can see the one that's on top, like that. And you can use the same set of notes for archiving underneath. And I always like to talk about Prezi because everybody always asks, like, what about Prezi? Do you like Prezi? Prezi's so cool. Everything that is in Prezi is an animated version of all of the problems that show up in PowerPoint and Keynote, with the added problems of people often haven't taken filmmaking classes. They don't know how Pan and Zoom work, and they don't know how they work strategically. Prezi can be used very strategically. It can be used well, but you need training in it. I don't know, my Facebook blew up for a long time about Prezi. Everybody loves it better. Harvard research says, well, I followed the money, right? And Prezi paid for that. And they say it didn't impact their findings, but I find that very hard to believe. Prezi has other limitations, and that there's big proprietary concerns unless your organization has purchased its own in-house version. If you create something in Prezi, just the one you find online, of course, it's out there in the cloud. It's there for anybody to find. That's why a lot of engineering and technical organizations don't use it. As well, it is not ADA compliant, and they openly say they have no intention of being ADA compliant anytime soon. So there are limitations. There are moments that Prezi might be the right answer, but really think about that very carefully, given the organizations that you're in and who your audiences are, and maybe who you have to answer to, right? So all of these things kind of magnify. You can see that sometimes, putting things on the slide is just not the right idea. Okay, that maybe we don't want to do them. So all the same problems show up in Prezi as show up elsewhere, but with a couple added little bit of features. In Prezi, one thing that you can do, you can create your whole Prezi, and then you can ask it to create, I think it's called an outline version, right, of all the notes that you've put in there. But if this is the outline, that's not very helpful either. Okay, I see I see a little bit of kind of sentence heading sort of things going on a little bit down below, but this seems really fragmented, a little jagged, if you will. So again, same problems. This was from one of my kids' classes, right? That was a Prezi, and it didn't really work out. And again, I mentioned these at the beginning. There's beautiful templates out there. What I often see on a lot of these templates is that the font is very, very small. These templates, I think, are more for marketing documents, not presentations, documents. It's really nice to sometimes create marketing documents, business documents using presentation software, because it's easy to move things around in design, easier than Illustrator or something for people who are not experts at Illustrator. So we want to really think carefully, can people actually really use what the thing is that we're putting on the wall or that we're putting in front of them? And I'm going to stop sharing right here. I don't even know what time it is. We're getting close to where we have maybe time for a few questions if we want to do that. So Melissa, I hope we answered your question about how to deal with people who want a copy of the presentation because they don't want to listen. So that notes pane, I hope, will help do the trick. There's all sorts of wonderful things happening now, really magnified, of course, in the last year and a half because of the pandemic, about voice to text technology. And different versions of closed captioning or voice to text are more or less accurate depending on your topic, right? So the AI has to pick up your technical language if it's being used. I had students do a study of closed captioning with the slideware. And what they did find was for more technical work, Google Slides with their example tended to work a little bit better or caught the AI quicker, right? It moved into the algorithms a little bit more quickly. Microsoft Translate, I gotta say, that thing is magical. I haven't been able to explore the power of all those features at all. But I would say maybe think about speech to text for some people who don't want to listen. Melissa, I have to say, there was a professor I worked with at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he didn't like anything that Christine and I were saying about sentence headers and visuals. And here's what he said: I want my students to put every single word that they're going to say on the slide. I don't care about visuals. If they're going to say it out loud, I want that word to be on the slide, word for word. And then because we said, why? And he said, because their presentations are really, really bad. And I just want to read them. And we're like, they're bad because they're reading them. And he wanted nothing to do with it. It was hysterical, but there was nothing, he was too close to retirement to change his ways. He didn't feel like it. So whatever, that's fair. But there's that interplay, right? Like the authentic interaction in the moment. And then, like you said, that usefulness after the fact or for other purposes. Some people can't hear well, so they need supporting documents. And that's where I really do find that that the archival notes, it's a godsend. I mean, it just really supports everybody. You can have translations down there. You can have LaTeX code down there. You can have anything you want down there to help somebody on the other end of it accomplish what it is they need to accomplish. Yeah. Such a really great point about ASL and scientific terms. When I hosted a conference here for a regional ASEE, we had to have sign language interpreters, and they wanted to work with the speakers a couple weeks in advance because the ASL folks they create a sign for the technical term. And at the beginning of the talk, they say that they sign to the people that they're working for. When I do, whatever the signing is, this is the word. And then they spell it out. It's really, really interesting. Font types, you can use any font that you want as long as it's big enough. And I hate Comic Sans.
So everybody hates Comic Sans.
Everybody hates Comic Sans.
There's been some interesting conversations about Comic Sans and dyslexia, being better for people with dyslexia. And I have a lot of students here who have dyslexia. To a person, they say, please don't. At this point, we have 13, 14, 15 years of reading Times New Roman or Arial. We have trained ourselves for that. We do not want to retrain ourselves for these other fonts that are non-standard. I thought that was really interesting. I never would have assumed that in a million years. So yeah. We're almost at the bottom of the hour. Any other questions rising? Like I said, I know we only have an hour. I have to go teach in a few minutes, but I would welcome continuing conversations, or you know, we can even do a workshop later if people want to just try on some ideas or something, whatever might work for all of you. But I think it's exciting. It's exciting now to go experiment with it, right? And find your way.
How about the slide designer in PowerPoint?
Say it again.
The slide designer in PowerPoint?
I don't know what to think of that. Like, it always comes up now and I'm like, oh, look, cool, pretty, but then it doesn't really serve my point. So it distracts me for a minute, that's for sure. Right? It shows up over here, right? I'm like, ooh, pretty. Because I'm a crow and I see a shiny thing and I want to pick it up and play with it or something. I think sometimes it's a good trigger maybe for rethinking an approach that might be stale for you. So if you look at those suggestions in that manner, think about it, but don't let it overtake. Right? Always keep control of what it is you need to do. Excellent. All right. Vicki, do you have any closing credits you need to put out there or anything?
Well, so the first thing we do is everybody turn on your microphone and let's have a round of applause.
Oh. Nice idea. Oh, you Allison.
Or I guess turn on your camera and we'll do jazz hands.
Yes.
I love hanging out with other people that are excited to be in the same place. Thank you.
And I just want to thank you. Thank you so much, Traci. But thank you to everybody who attended, and thank you for a lively discussion in our chat. Traci, we're going to take you up on the workshop idea because I think it's great that we got the sort of the introduction, right?
Yeah.
But now that we've learned, I mean, we're instructional designers. We know we learn better if we play. We know we learn better if we move and if we interact and if we make mistakes with the support of each other and the support of you. So you guys can look forward to that. Everybody keep an eye on our website. I am going to stop the recording after we do one more round of applause and jazz hands. And
All of you. Thanks for being here.
thank you.